This episode of the Citadel Cafe is brought to you by listeners like you. Visit patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe to find out how you can become a patron and help make this show possible. This is the Citadel Cafe, episode number 354 for Wednesday, March 25th. My name is Joel Duggan, and the Citadel Cafe is where my friends and I hang out to talk about the geeky stuff that we are into. Joining me this week is my co-host from the Spawn Chunks podcast, a Minecraft content creator with very close to 500,000 subscribers on YouTube, and the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, Jonny, or as many of you may know him, Pixlriffs on all the social media that matters. Hello, sir.
Hello, it's me. I'm back, and it feels like this is the shortest time I've spent away from the Citadel Cafe. Last time I was on, we were talking about Rise of Skywalker back in January.
Yep.
So it's only been a 2-month stretch, even though I talk to you basically every week anyway. It's kind of nice to be back on the kind of casual, nerdy podcast, talking about some stuff that isn't super blocky all of the time.
Yeah, all the time, and there's no news. Like we don't have anything to keep up on the Citadel Cafe.
Well, yeah, there is news, but I don't know if we're going to talk too much about that.
Is it sci-fi or is it fiction? Like
it's
science
very
fact?
much dystopia at this point. It's
exactly.
very, very dystopia.
Coming along with us for this fantastic ride is Megan Townsend, back again this week. You can find her at Megan Townsend on all the social media that matters, and of course /Megan Townsend on Twitch. Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. We mentioned this very briefly on the Render Distance when Jonny and I were talking about the current, world health crisis that we're all dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to dwell on it too much. I'd like to provide a reprieve for our listeners and give a lot of recommendations and stuff for people to do while they're stuck at home. But I've been working from home for 10 years, so my day-to-day changed very, very little. I can't go to the gym. Yeah. Going to the grocery store is stressful, but you just end up buying much larger loads of groceries so that you don't have to go very often. I kind of waited for the dust to settle and all the hoarders to be done their thing and gave the grocery store time to restock so that when I went to go get groceries on Monday, I got all the things I needed. Like, it was all there. I didn't have to. Nothing was really missing outside of flour, but I'm not out of flour. So it's one of those things that it really hasn't affected me personally, but, still obviously doing my part and encouraging all others in my circles to do their part and listen to federal government rules, provincial government regulations, and medical professionals and not people that are not medical professionals.
Yeah, I'm only going out when I have to. Bethany, my roommate, made a couple of face masks, just for whenever we go out. They're not as great as cotton ones, but there's a pattern that was circulating around online, and she was like, we could make some custom ones in fun colors. So I chose a black one because I'm boring, but she got one with cute bunnies on it. It's actually very sweet looking. And they don't work as well as the actual medical ones, but at least they're something. It's something to kind of help be a little bit more preventative. But I have to make a trek out afterwards today. But also I'm trying to walk over, so it's a way to get fresh air, and I'm only getting the things that I need. I'm in and out. I'm just like, all right, getting all the important stuff. Let's go. I'm making a list beforehand. So.
Yeah, and if you've got a mobile device that does contactless payment, and you go to the self checkout, then you don't have to deal with anybody. The closest thing is just other people in aisles, and that's the only time it becomes difficult because the aisles are not 2 meters wide. So you can't be 2 meters from everybody, because if you're going down the aisle, it would be a traffic jam if people waited for one person to go through the aisle, because half the time people get down there, the thing that they wanted is gone. So they're like, well, what do I do now? So they stand in the middle of the aisle and they think for 3 minutes. It's like, okay, guys,
just keep moving. Just keep moving.
Yeah.
All said and done, though, I feel like I'm thriving a little bit. I am getting a little bit stir crazy just by staying in the house all the whole time. But I'm dedicating a lot of this free time to creative endeavors. So I don't feel like I'm having a really bad time. As an introvert, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to see people. I don't have to talk to anyone. I can choose not to get dressed if I don't want to. I'm in my pajamas. It's great.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I saw.
Trying to feel like a human though.
Yeah, I saw a post online the other day about, hey, all my introvert friends, be nice to your extrovert friends that are really stressed out right now. And I was just like, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, Jonny, I know you and I touched base on Monday a little bit about this. We really didn't get that deep because it was the render distance on the Minecraft podcast, our extended, version for patrons, and we didn't really want to delve into it too heavily. But I mean, how are you doing with all of this?
I'm largely okay, and like you, I work from home by default anyway, and I have done for several years now. It's been about 5 years since I left my last sort of in-person office job and started working from home for various people, and now, of course, myself. So, yeah, I've got to the point where I put out a kind of Twitter and YouTube statement because I don't know, this is something I have to do now, I guess, now that there is some expectation on my creative output. And some people in my stream were asking me if I was going to be doing more videos and streams. Now everybody's being encouraged to stay indoors. And I understand that the reason for that is because people understand we're going to have a lot more free time. We need more entertainment. There are going to be some things that we won't be able to go out and see people. So we all need more entertainment coming from YouTube creators and Twitch streamers and any kind of online forms of entertainment that they can get at their home. But I have decided that my output is not going to be as consistent as it has been for a little while because of wanting to monitor my own mental health a little better. I've noticed myself getting more stressed out as I just worry about public health and the well-being of my family and my friends. And it's more like a secondhand kind of anxiety that is creeping in where, of course, it's not affecting my routine as much, but I see other people thinking, oh gosh, I'm going crazy being cooped up indoors. And I think I kind of have this weird moment of reflection of am I going crazy being cooped up indoors? To which the basic answer is no, you're indoors most of the time anyway. You don't really go out except to get groceries. But then even that is now something that you have to consider a lot more seriously. I would normally walk to the store and grab a couple of things, maybe if not every day, then every other day. And now we're having to consider that less and less. It's got to be something that you've got to really give some consideration to, figure out, can I get some stuff delivered to me and so forth. And so, yeah, it's having more impact on me than I realized at first. So I'm relaxing my schedule a little bit. I'm still planning on doing all of the stuff that I do, but between my YouTube channel, the Spawn Chunks podcast, the Hermitcraft recap, and streaming on Twitch, I wasn't really giving myself a weekend, especially with Hermitcraft being so busy. I'm having to watch all of the videos that the Hermits put out every week, either as they come out or over a 2-day stretch, so I have enough time to cover all of it. And that was eating up a lot of my free time that I was otherwise going to be spending relaxing. So I think I'm probably going to skip a video here and there just because I want to take a day off whenever, and I need to feel less bad about that because it's going to stop me from burning out in the long term. So yeah, I think people were expecting wow, every content creator goes into overdrive, and every content creator probably was in overdrive in the first place and needs to pace themselves if this is going to be sustainable.
Yeah, and you've got that situation where a lot of people would probably assume that content creators are not full time, right?
Yes.
They're assuming, well, this person has a day job, and now that they're not at their day job, they'll have more time to create videos, forgetting that person is potentially a husband or wife, father or mother, and now also has a basket full of family around 24/7. Right.
Yes, which is not a situation that I'm in necessarily. I live with my wife,
right,
and we're the only two people in this household. But at the same time, I want to spend some time relaxing at the end of the day with her. And I was more and more frequently spending my evenings after we had dinner and watched, something, eating dinner on the couch. I would then go back up to my office and work for another 4 hours to get a video finished or edited or whatever. And so, yeah, I need to spend that time with her some more and just unwind and also help her process the stuff that she has to deal with, being American with family overseas. And my family is up in the north of England, and we have, no real way of going and seeing them. But even worse, she has to deal with how America is handling this health crisis on top of how the UK is handling it, and wanting to make sure that her family is safe and everything. There's just additional concerns, plus the idea that if anything happened to them, she wouldn't be able to travel internationally to go and help them, is, I think, weighing on her a lot. And so I'm trying my best to be there for her and make sure that is what gets prioritized over, the content needs of my audience. Because, yeah, things have been going well, as you mentioned in the pre-intro. And I think, if anything, streamers and YouTube creators and so forth are going to be seeing an increase in audience at this point, which is, I think, not necessarily something that I want to capitalize on. I don't want to be that greedy and be like, well, I have to make all the, videos and stuff while I still can. It's like, no, people are still going to be there at the end of this, and we need to pace ourselves just for our own health, really.
There's also no rush. This is going to be weeks, not a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to be over in 14 days. Like 14 days is what people I think have stuck in their head because that's the recommended quarantine. That's not how long things are going to be shut down. That's how long you have to stay indoors if you're
the more
infected.
Often people go outside, the longer it's just going to be.
Oh, exactly, right?
Like it's a problem. I was like, I'm like, man, I'm going to get so much stuff done. I'm going to make a bunch of content, and then the first few days I actually just had to sit and be like, I haven't had a break in a long time. So I just didn't do anything for like the first week. And then like around like Wednesday of last week, I was like, okay, I'm going to start being a little bit more creative and like trying to sort some stuff out. So I was writing notes and things, but I definitely, I feel for, you guys who are doing content creation or more regularly than I am anyway, because it must be really stressful with that higher demand for people wanting your content, which is nice, I'm sure, but also like, I feel bad for anyone who's spreading themselves too thin. And we should all take this time to like take a rest.
Absolutely. And this is the thing that I was passing along last week. I'll leave her name out of it, but a friend of mine that's a tattoo artist is, of course, her business is shut down. And so she's an artist, she's a tattoo artist, she's an entrepreneur, and you're combining the get up and go of a creative individual that we all know, but also the get up and go of an entrepreneur that has a brick and mortar business to run. Like this is the kind of lifestyle that has you on the go constantly, and you've gone from 120 miles an hour to 0, and she didn't know what to do with herself. And so I had seen a meme, not that I tend to pass these out, but it was a good one. It wasn't necessarily about COVID-19. It was more about like life at home and adjustment and just mental health kind of stuff. So it was a positive thing. It wasn't jokey. And it was just like, it's okay to sit and do nothing. Like everybody has these ideas of like what they're going to do with all this free time. This is stressful. It's quite all right to sit in front of a window with a cup of coffee and do jack shit for an hour. Like, you can give yourself that kind of time. And she thanked me for sharing it. I don't know whether she used it or not, or took the advice, because I've been in that situation before where I've got a lot on the go and I should take a break, and I don't listen to my own advice, and I end up, being more stressed about the content. But the thing there is that the takeaway from it is that I think that there is an opportunity here, and I've been getting a lot of positive conversation about the situation. Not necessarily that they're making light of it or ignoring it, but I listen to the Daily Tech News Show. It's my daily podcast about technology. A lot of their stories in the main show are dealing about how COVID-19 and the infrastructure and manufacturing and all those things affected overseas, of course, is affecting tech. But in the pre-show, which I support them on Patreon, and I pay $5. I'm at a different level, but $2 a month is the basic entry for the Good Day Internet, which is the pre and post show around Daily Tech News Show. And in those pre and post shows, they talk about whatever the hell they want. It's free for all. Obviously, lately it's a lot focused on more so lifestyle changes and things. They're not affected that much because just like all of us, or at least Johnny and I, they work from home already. They're a full-time podcast crew, so they're already there. But sharing some good news stories, talking about, hearing about people that, one of the hosts, Tom, and I've got a recommendation from Tom here in a minute. He said that he called up his pet sitter. He was going to take a trip, I think in like May or something, or April. And he called them up and said, hey, obviously we're not taking the trip. The trip was canceled, but keep the money that I paid you for the pet sitter. I was going to have to pay it anyway, like regardless. But I know that you guys are hit hard right now, and in my household we can afford it, so keep it. And I've been hearing a lot of those kinds of stories, where people that are okay and are working from home, where their business is not as affected as others, taking that extra leap. There was a restaurant in Seattle, and again, this is news, this is not hearsay, I think I saw it on CBC. It was doing okay because in addition to ordering meals that could be delivered to you, you could also order a meal and have it delivered to a homeless shelter.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah, that's
cool,
outstanding.
Right? So it's like we're going to be leaving to deliver meals anyway. It's fine for us to drop by the homeless shelter because it's a one stop, right? Like here's the 6 meals that 6 different people bought for the homeless shelter. We drop it off in one stop and then we continue on our way to deliver the other packages for people's dinners, or whatever they're doing. And it's the kind of things like that I think the adaptation, the people working from home, the story I saw on CBC about dolphins and swans returning to the canals in Venice because they've been on lockdown for so long that the canals are cleaner than they have been in 60 years. Like there's an underlying message here that when humans aren't being humans, a whole lot changes faster than you think. Mm-hmm. And if we can just slow down and take a look, then on the other side of this, I'm really hoping that it's not just a flip a switch and everything's back to normal, because I don't want things to get back to normal. I want things to be healthy and happy, but I think normal is part of the reason why it took so long for people to listen to the government. Before it was, you have to stay home or you will be arrested or fined. People didn't listen before that. And there was a reason for that. And I'm not saying that it was necessarily screw the government or I don't care. I think it was just habit. The rat race, like it was all those kind of things all piled on top of each other. It isn't going to be that bad. Like all those kind of things where if people just took the time to slow down, really look at the situation and would realize, oh yeah, this is serious. We need to take this serious.
How fast information travels now and how fast misinformation travels now as well is really kind of being reflected here. But at the same time, you also have the advantage of the world being so much more connected than it ever has been.
Yeah.
So news, once it's been verified by multiple sources and advice and everything can be transmitted, I feel like so many people have rallied around the cause of making sure that hospitals aren't overwhelmed by practicing staying indoors more frequently. And yeah, I think if nothing else, what I want to come out of this whole situation is that we are kinder to each other and to ourselves, and that the sense of community and not taking that for granted remains after all of this has passed. And I feel like more frequently I hear people talking about it as though this is the new normal, as if for the foreseeable future we cannot tell if it will pass, much less when. But I think it is nice to think about what we're going to get out of this and think about the future and think about where we are going to return to after all of this is over.
And I agree. I mean, I'm hoping it's more of like there's a lot of reform that happens and a good hard look about the societal systems that we've put into place for ourselves. I really hope that changes and reassessing what is deemed a necessary service.
Yeah.
Like, anyone who's listening who works in grocery stores or food service or anything, you guys are the real heroes. Healthcare service, you guys are the real heroes of this whole thing. Props to you guys.
One of the last things I want to touch on, and we'll move on right after this, and that's a resource that Tom Merritt shared from the Daily Tech News Show. Every Thursday, he does an editor's desk that's accessible to higher tier patrons. But in some cases, he makes them available a Creative Commons. So like you get them first as a patron, but then you can share them with whoever you want. I don't think you can republish, but you can certainly, share it around. And so he made this one public just because it was more of a worldwide kind of informational thing. And the title of the article / 10-minute podcast, it's a very easy listen. It's called Dealing with All That News Out There. Tom's editor's desk, Thursday, March 19th. So it's just from last week. And he breaks down how he consumes news as a professional journalist. And he just flips his focus on tech to the focus on COVID-19 and world news. And he has a few main points. He explains them much better than I do. So I'll just give you the bullet points, which is take breaks from the news. Don't watch TV news. Put your source attention on high alert. Cultivate good sources, seek them out, and don't spread bad info. And that includes even making fun of bad info, right? Like retweeting something that is terrible and saying this is terrible is still spreading the bad news, because people might not remember where they saw that. and it's kind of hard to remember whether it was a real source or not in a 48 hours, you know. But he does an excellent job of explaining it all. I was feeling overwhelmed myself with the amount of stuff I was trying to keep up on. And so I've reduced my consumption to the CBC newsletter in the morning and the CBC COVID-19 newsletter in the evening. That's it. That's all I get. Anything that is more important than that is going to hit me from family and friends, or it's going to show up in some sort of alert on my phone. So, you know, like, and I feel like I'm pretty well informed. You know, like I could probably add more news sources than that, but I feel like I'm getting enough in terms of my local community and my country. I don't necessarily need to know how things are going in Italy or Iran or whatever. Like that doesn't affect me right now. And there's a lot of hard news to watch out there and listen to. So I find reading is also a lot better. I took a look for an exercise of a global news post where they were talking about stuff on YouTube. And it was just like, it's a vetted news source. It's a television program that just happened to post this clip on YouTube. And it was not sensationalized, but it was just trying to get eyeballs. And there was no good news. There was no balanced opinion. There's a lot of really shocking footage. Like no one needs that right now. So I really encourage everyone to go check out this post from Tom Merritt. Listen to it. It's 10 minutes of your life. You won't even get halfway through your dishes. And you'll be, I think, better informed and better equipped to take on the amount of news and information we all have to process in the next little while. But on that note, we are going to provide you guys with a whole lot of distraction over the next little while.
I think we all needed to get it out of our system.
Yeah, well, and it's
definitely
important to talk about. Like we can't. I wanted to avoid it for a long time, but then I thought, no, this is too important. We can't avoid it, but we can always control how we talk about it and when, right? So, but yeah, no, I appreciate that. We have a listener email. This has actually been on hold for a couple of weeks because we didn't record last week because I was under the weather. This is from Lord Valor regarding the world building discussion. Hey, Joel and Megan, Brackett and Johnny. I just got done listening to the Citadel Cafe 351, The World Building Rabbit Hole, and I really enjoyed the episode. It was a good change of pace. Having an episode like that every once in a while is fun to listen to, in my opinion. Well, I got good news for you, Lord Valor. You're in for another one today. As for one of the world building discussions you guys had, I was first introduced into creating my own lore in a Minecraft world when I joined my friend's Minecraft server. Each person had a nation, and they could create and build. To fit it with the theme, I created my own nation and wrote a backstory for it. I ended up with a civilization that lived completely underground, tricked into thinking that the surface was unsafe to live on. On my single-player world, however, I do not have a dedicated lore. I just build things as I need them to help me advance my game. Thanks for the wonderful podcast. It's great for the long drives I take. Keep it up, Lord Valor. Thank you so much, LV. For the email. I'm glad that you enjoyed that episode. And world building is actually going to be a bit of a theme today as well. I'm just going to build on that and say that when I'm doing creative stuff, sometimes I'll write a backstory. Like for my comics, when I was drawing Starcrossed, I would always think about like how long Charlie and Sam lived together, where Sam was from. It didn't have to have like super details, and it wasn't anything I was ever going to make public, but it helped me write better jokes and stories for them because I needed to know what their experiences were previous so that I could and then inform how they would react to a current situation. Right now on the Citadel, I'm building a modern city and I'm designing a good portion of it. There's no lore. There's no story behind the modern city, but there is a history. I want the city to look like it was probably established somewhere in the mid-1900s and has existed ever since. So we need to kind of work in the modern city, the modern buildings that have been built in the last 10 years, but also have buildings that look like they might be from the 70s. We're going to have a small town or a old section that looks like it's more like a small town America sort of thing, like North American type stuff. And so we're going to mix it all up, and hopefully at the end of that, you'll have a sense of time passing. So even though it's not lore, having a history or a time span of things, I find adds a lot of life when you're doing world building. Similar to how like people in Minecraft will make something look like a ruin, and it just kind of adds that sense of time to a game. Johnny, like, do you with world building and stuff like that, do you find that you get into any rabbit holes? Do you find it takes up a lot of your time, or you just kind of keep it light?
I usually keep it light, especially as far as my Minecraft stuff goes. And I have, as somebody who primarily works in a single-player world, I've figured out a little bit of loose lore for each area, but I'm not going to stop it from. I'm not going to let it stop me from doing something creative with no real regard for the lore. If there's something else cool that I think will fit there, then great. So like I'm still going to build technical things all around this farm, even though the farmhouse itself looks like a kind of rustic structure. There's still going to be like a bunch of sheep in glass tanks that are providing me with wool. And I think it's fun to give yourself a bit of license to go crazy with that stuff, and remember that you can steal ideas from wherever you want to if it's your own personal project and nobody else is going to see it and you're not monetizing it or whatever, because realistically the Disney lawyers aren't going to sue you if you build Disneyland in Minecraft, as long as it's just your Disneyland in Minecraft. So yeah, as somebody who's building mountains right now for a modern ski resort project, I kind of went, well, mountains are also quite prominent in stuff like Lord of the Rings, the kind of fantasy stories that I really love. And a lot of people in the chat were also suggesting this when I was streaming it on Twitch. They said, why don't you build like a dwarf ruin underneath here? Build like Erebor on the back of one of these mountains, as though the people in the ski resort have come along way later, like thousands of years later, when this dwarf civilization is gone, and they have no idea that they're building a ski resort on top of a place where dwarves used to mine, and there were, kind of giant pillars underneath holding up the outsides of these mountains. And I kind of like that as an idea. I'm sort of peripherally fascinated with anybody who builds like secret passages and stuff in their houses. The people who've got like those Scooby-Doo-esque mansions where they can have a secret room behind a bookshelf or something like that. And I like the idea of there being more below the surface of some of the stuff I'm building. So yeah, I'll work in bits and pieces of story here and there. I'm not writing out backstory for who all of these people are and, writing entire paragraphs about it. But that is now kind of what I'm doing with Dungeons and Dragons anyway. So I still have an outlet for that side if I need it.
So Megan, with your lore building, I guess either for the book and the writing projects that you're working on, or for things like a little bit lighter, like RP stuff in D&D, or building in a Minecraft play session. Like how deep into lore do you get? Like do you use it in varying depths, or is it something that's just like all encompassing for you?
I think it depends on the project. For the book, that is very all encompassing. Because I feel like world building, like if you're gonna write a story, if you're writing a book, one of the pieces of advice that I was given was make sure you know your world inside and out. You know the history of it. I don't think, some people say you should know what the plumbing system is like. I don't think you need to know that, but like at least know what the history was, like what happened in the past to get to the point that you're telling the story in right now, because that affects the outcome of like the world that you're building. So it's important to know that information. And stuff like D&D, it's a little bit more collaborative. So I focus on the lore of my character, and then the lore of the world is kind of depending on what style of D&D you're playing. If you're pulling from like, the actual world of D&D that's like pre-written, like in any of the hardcover books or anything, you kind of have a skeletal basis there, and then you just build off of that, and by inserting your character into certain areas. But what I like about D&D is that it's very, very collaborative, and things like the Minecraft server, like the Citadel that we're on. I feel like I don't know if there's a huge lore about it, but it's very it's collaborative. Like everyone kind of has their own, everyone is adding their own thing to it to kind of tell a larger story. So for me, world building is really dependent on what I'm focused on. But when it comes to writing my book, I've spent too much time on to spend that much time on it, because I don't know that much about my world yet. So I'm trying to nail down all the details of like history and everything to get to that, to the point where telling it is going to be really easy, because I know the world intimately.
Yeah.
So
I find it creates a set of rules, right? Like
yeah, exactly.
some structure, because, and I mean, on a smaller scale in Minecraft, it's like I don't leave anything floating. Like if I'm building something up in the sky because it needs to be up there mechanically because it's some fancy farm, I'm still putting log pillar struts under it so it looks like it's being held up, because that just would bug me. Like it would break the immersion of what I think everybody else has been working towards, on the Citadel. So I mean, there's also that little stigma of like, people that leave floating trees on Minecraft servers tend to get the stink eye. It's like, no,
You drive me nuts.
don't do that.
I know that leaves eventually disappear.
Yes. Yeah. No.
Leaves go away, but I always am like, okay, I'm going to cut down every single trunk to make sure that the leaves disappear.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, in case people haven't guessed, sort of let the cat out of the bag, but we're going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons today. And this is something that has been really kind of circling my radar for quite some time. I played it very briefly a few years ago, maybe for 6 or 8 weeks with some friends at a new job that I had. I didn't know anyone, so it was a way for me to get to know some coworkers, especially some of the more quiet coworkers, people that weren't super outgoing, like at the job. It was a public space, so it like if you're not as an extrovert, then like you're not going to be able to get to know someone, kind of like in that kind of environment. So I really enjoyed it, but I have very, very limited experience with it. And then in the render distance, when Johnny and I were talking, and he mentioned that he was getting into Dungeons and Dragons, I thought, I'm going to plan for when there's enough experience under both belts, to have a conversation. And I know, of course, obviously on the Citadel Cafe, Megan, you've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for quite some time. So with both of you here, I thought what an excellent opportunity to have a really good conversation about D&D. If anybody that's listening is somehow unfamiliar, Dungeons and Dragons was designed by Gary Gygax and Dave Anderson in 1974 is when it was published by Technical Studios Rules, but it's now published by Wizards of the Coast. We'll have a link to this in the show notes. Wizards is now a subsidiary of Hasbro since 1997. So Dungeons and Dragons is 46 years old. It's not a new thing. I feel like it's gotten a bit of a resurgence in the last couple of years with video campaigns of people playing, being recorded. Obviously, it got quite a lot of attention in Stranger Things, being featured by by that show as something the kids were playing in the basement in the 70s and the 80s. It was derived from miniature war games with a variation of 1971, the chainmail serving as the initial rule system. D&D's publication is commonly recognized as the beginning of modern role-playing games and role-playing game industries. My very first exposure to Dungeons and Dragons, and there's only a few people of a specific age will get this reference, was the 1983 cartoon where a group of kids took a roller coaster ride on a haunted roller coaster and were magically dumped into the realm of Dungeons and Dragons, where a dungeon master then bestowed on them magical items, and they were like, archer, thief, magician, all this kind of stuff. And these kids had to basically get home, and that was the whole adventure for the whole 3 seasons that it ran. I remember liking it. It doesn't stand up at all. It's rough. It's not a very good show.
I watched I think the first episode of this kind of recently, just on a lark, and what the amount of time it took Joel to explain it is the amount of time the show takes to explain it. Like the first 15 seconds of that, the intro to it before the title card comes up, is basically all the introduction you get. It's like, oh wow, a roller coaster. Oh, what's happening? We're in a strange world. I'm a dungeon master. You have magical powers now. And then that's it. And then they're just there. It's one of those shows that like the editing is just so fast.
Oh yeah.
And it's like a YouTube jump cut thing some 30 years before YouTube was even invented. It's so nuts how fast that show edits and the amount of stuff they just do not develop because they're constantly moving stuff forward. It's like it is in itself a roller coaster ride. Perhaps not a very good one. The special effects could be better.
Yeah.
But it's almost adorable. The first episode of it is on YouTube. You can probably find it. Just go and watch the start of this, and you will probably just laugh at how ridiculous this is for a format of a cartoon. It makes modern cartoons look so much slower paced, but much more developed by comparison.
Yeah.
No, definitely.
So the rest of my history with D&D or D&D-like experiences are just that Sunday night, group that I had for a little while. But rolling into multiplayer, like video games like World of Warcraft, which was obviously heavily influenced by a lot of things, including Dungeons and Dragons. And I played WoW before I played Dungeons and Dragons. Most people, it's the opposite experience. And I really saw the parallels, and I understood why I liked both and why I got so into World of Warcraft, because of that rich history, because of those rules, but because of that freedom of doing it however you want. Like there wasn't one way to play the game. And um, I've been wanting to return to D&D. I really haven't gotten into any of the series that are out there to watch it and consume it. But I also know that now there are a number of technologies and advantages of, between FaceTime and Discord and other technology that's available out there, applications and whatnot, even like dice rolling websites and things, where people can now play D&D remotely. So if somebody from your key core D&D group moves across the country, or we all can't go outside, then you can still use this as a way to stay in touch, entertain, and have it be a way to connect with people, which is what I got out of the round the table group, which is that I really got to know some people and I made some new friends just by showing up once a week. And there was no social pressure. You don't have to make small talk. You're talking about how to kill the goblin. Like there's pressure. Like things have to happen. So I guess I'll start with Megan, just out of curiosity, because I don't know if we've talked about this. When did you first start playing D&D?
I'm trying to think now. About 3 years ago.
Oh wow, that recent. Okay.
It hasn't been for very long. So like you, I started with World of Warcraft first. Like I started playing World of
Okay.
Warcraft when I was maybe like 15. So it's been about 4 years, less than 5 years for sure. But it's been like as soon as we jumped into it, it's been like a lot of D&D all the time. So we started off with like a Friday night campaign. That was, we kind of everyone made a character, and the responsibility of DMing was kind of passed around a little bit. So, people would jump in at certain points to, because everyone wanted a chance to try everything, right? So none of us had played. Well, some of the people in our group had played before, but some people had never DM'd, but they wanted to try DMing. Some people just wanted to be a character. So it was, it was the most collaborative storytelling that we could do, and we still kind of do that. Like we kind of bounce around um, between different games and different campaigns, even with the same group. Sorry, I thought I had to sneeze for a second. And then on top of that, we also started doing every Wednesday. Well, not right now, obviously, but every Wednesday at our local comic book store down in the city. There's it's run by Wizards of the Coast. It's called the Adventurers League. So the Adventurers League is sort of like an open D&D campaign that anyone can jump into, like literally anybody. All you have to do is make a character and figure out what level your character's at, and then based on the level of your character, you're put into a tier. So that way you're never a level 1 character with level 18 players. So everyone is, structured in between tier 1 to tier 4. The only thing with Adventures League, as accessible as it is, there's not a lot of room for what we call homebrew. So you can't hand wave stuff. It's very, very rigorous in its rules. It's very, very strict, and it's there as a way to avoid people from min-maxing a lot, like making sure that their character is like the best build. But oftentimes when you play, there's not a lot of story development going on. It's mostly just I'm gonna fight the thing, and there's no character development, there's no growth. It's just I'm just getting stronger. I'm gonna hit this thing with my axe. Great, I got a fun item out of it. I spent the whole. It's almost like in-person WoW, where
Right.
your whole purpose is to get the best armor, the best weapon. Like it's almost like a show off sort of thing.
Right.
So I didn't dislike it. I was really lucky in the sense that while most people are floaty, like you kind of bounce around between. You're almost like a sword for hire at this point. You kind of go to different groups. Like you're just thrown into a situation with a bunch of different people, and you can have a different party all the time. And the beauty of it is, if you end up traveling, as long as there's an AL league somewhere, you can take that character with you to play anywhere in the world, as long as it's an Adventures League zone and you have a member number and all this jazz. But we were lucky in the sense that our table was pretty consistent, so we were always playing with the same table. So our DM did get a little hand wavy, but if you miss something, like I had to take some time off because I was working on a play the same time we were in like a big section of our campaign, and everyone had leveled out of the tier that we all started in together, and I would have been forced to play with another table just to get to the same level that they were at, which I didn't like, so I kind of just stopped. So if you're open to just meeting a bunch of people, it's great. I wanted to stay with my friends,
right?
And I wouldn't have been able to. So that it has some pros and cons, for everything. But and then recently, since stopping the Wednesday night group, a couple of friends and I, we do an online D&D stream on Twitch every once in a while. It's usually every Tuesday nights, and that's more of like a storytelling collaborative. I just totally lost my train of thought. Yeah, storytelling collaborative, like homebrew.
Right.
Homebrew is the key word there. So I like the homebrew games more because you're not, you're still adhering to the rules of D&D. Like there's still like magical structures and you still have rules to make, but you can be a little looser with like how many magic items you have, and a DM can leave things up to discretion versus what's written in the book. So I like that looser aspect of it a bit more. Sorry, I went off forever.
No, that's good, because like I know we've talked about like what you're currently doing in D&D as it's come up naturally in conversation on the podcast before, but I wasn't sure about like the actual origins, because some people that I talked to have been playing for a really long time. Now there's varying levels of experience in their group, but the people that I tend to talk to have been playing it for a lot more than 5 years, or at least maybe not consistently, but like their first exposure was usually high school. Like that's usually where I find a lot of people are. But on the flip side, Jonny, you're brand new to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, I'm very much a noob.
And this, which is what sparked this idea for this episode of the Citadel Cafe. And of course, you and I talking every week on the render distance and the spawn chunks. And of course, then even pre-show before that, just kind of touching base. It's been really cool to hear about your kind of like experience. But like, what was your push to get into D&D like in the last month or so?
Yeah, I was never. I mean, I'd heard of D&D obviously before, just peripherally through other media, but I'd had very little exposure to the actual core rules of D&D and how it was played. But I have been playing stuff that has been inspired by D&D forever. One of the earliest memories I have of playing any kind of computer game was a text-based adventure, which, aside from a few calculations it would probably have to do for you attacking stuff, is basically D&D. It's a narrative-based thing where you're making decisions for a character in the world, and you tell the computer where you want to go, and the computer is your dungeon master, and it tells you what you can and can't do. And then more recently, going back through the older Final Fantasy games, before I was streaming Minecraft more regularly, I used to stream the Final Fantasy series, starting with the first one, which came out on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the original NES. And it became clear, and people in the chat were letting me know, that the battle system, character classes, monsters, everything was inspired by, if not directly lifted from, D&D and the Monster Manual and stuff like that. And obviously the game has gone through so many iterations since that era. We're in the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons right now, and I've heard some things about 4th edition being kind of more of a tactics war game, kind of giant battle simulator kind of thing, whereas now everything is a little bit more high adventure, swords and sorcery, heroic fantasy kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting to learn a little bit about the history of it, but I'd had very little exposure to people playing D&D itself until I started listening to the Adventure Zone podcast. And
I love the Adventure Zone. Sorry.
The Adventure Zone it's so good. I got really into this is a podcast that's done by the McElroy brothers, Justin, Travis, and Griffin, and their dad, Clint McElroy, is their 4th player. And it started out with Griffin as the DM. And they are better known, perhaps, or were at the time, for their podcast, My Brother and Me, which was an advice show, and still is. It's just past its like 500th episode. They've been doing this forever. And they started, I think, when somebody was on paternity leave or something. They just recorded an episode that was about them playing D&D with their dad. And they were very... it was irreverent and kind of pastiche-y. Like, they enjoyed what they were doing, but they were also like, oh, this is so nerdy, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. And they were trying to kind of send up the tropes of the genre and throwing in a lot of adult humor. And they were being kind of very kind of, I guess, not like patronizing, but they were kind of, they were making fun of it while also having fun with it. And eventually it spun out into this incredibly fantastic homebrewed story. They started out, I think, with the adventure that comes with the D&D starter set, but then Griffin decided to kind of make it his own very quickly, and it became one of the more beloved D&D podcasts out there. And so I got really into that. I listened to their full adventure, the first kind of campaign they did, and I loved that. But I thought, I don't know if I'm ever really going to do this myself, because I didn't know who the right group would be. I definitely wanted to play with friends and people who I knew well, because I didn't necessarily want the awkwardness of having to negotiate a new relationship with a stranger with lots of extra rules being added into the mix, and like potentially, some people, D&D has a reputation for some people getting very specific about the type of rules they want to play with and being sticklers for things being mechanically accurate. And this is why it's such a relief to hear Megan talk about like the homebrew games and stuff being more fun a lot of the time, is because the rule oriented kind of, you have to have this amount of movement before you can do things, and everything being on maps and a grid and everything kind of puts me off. And so I was delighted when I started looking into D&D a little bit more and listening to these podcasts that people didn't have to take that approach. You could fudge things as much or as little as you wanted. And now that I own the core rulebooks, one of my favorite things about it is how open they are in writing in the core rulebooks to say, this is just a rule set that you can choose what you want out of it. You can adopt everything in here. You can adapt the bits you want, or you can ignore as much as you need to. These are kind of tools for you to use rather than like commandments to be obeyed. And that aspect of it really appeals to me, and it means it becomes a much more open platform for you to just tell a story. And I have a vague history of wanting to write fantasy stuff. I used to work in bookshops when I was out of university, and I had a lot of ideas stored up from those days. I'd always loved reading fantasy as a kid, and so I really enjoyed the idea of coming up with my own fantasy story. And a few friends, my wife, and a bunch of us just kind of got interested in it around the same time. So I figured we may as well give it a go, and I put myself into the role of DM because I thought I was going to be the driving force behind organizing all of it, and it sort of made sense for me to take that role, given that I was the most enthusiastic about it at first. And since then,
it's like throwing a dinner party. It's like throwing a dinner party. You don't want to invite everybody over for dinner and then tell someone else to cook. Like if it's your idea, you kind of have to be the one at the helm.
Take the reins. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So out of the group, how many is everyone their first time playing D&D?
Yes.
Wow.
Including me. So I'd never done a session myself before, so I was throwing myself into DMing and having this world, and also having an NPC, because there was only 4 of us, including myself, playing. So the group is pretty small. And the other 3, it was their first time. And of course, I think my wife and our friend Michael are both writers, and Ella, our 4th player, is an English teacher, so she's obviously kind of read a lot of books in her time, and likes kind of fantasy and romance books and that kind of stuff. And so is kind of, they're an ideal group really, because they have very creative and inventive minds. They're not necessarily the kind of people who are going to just shrug when you ask them what they want to do. And I think that was a good group. And it was a group whose boundaries I already knew very well. So I knew what kind of adventure I wanted to play with them from an early point. And I think that's very different to having kind of a pickup game where you're just kind of playing with whoever down at the Games Workshop or something like that. It felt more personal to us immediately, which was a vibe I definitely wanted.
Which is why I definitely prefer the homebrew games. Like, again, like you were saying, the pickup games. While I was really lucky to have a consistent table, the idea, that's why I stopped doing it, because the idea of playing with other people that I didn't know, and honestly, as a woman in a comic book setting, and like in a comic book store playing D&D, you get a lot of pushback on stuff. So I just wasn't open to having that sort of energy thrown my way. So I was like, I'm just not. And then jumping back into another homebrew game has been super
nice. So, because I had the same kind of concerns. Obviously, I'm not going forward with it now, but I wanted less screen time. Like I wanted something to do. I realized shortly after, because I do this every year. Like I have people over for my birthday, which is obviously not happening this year. And then I have people over at Christmas time. I tend to cook, 10, 12 people show up. It's usually a pretty good time. And I realized at Christmas time this year, because of how so busy I was this fall, how much I enjoyed that, how much I enjoy hosting. And I thought, I could do this more often. And I said, I don't need an excuse to just have some friends over. It doesn't have to be this many. So it doesn't have to be this much work. And I thought, I really enjoy playing D&D. I'd like to see if I can get a group of people together that would be willing to come over. I would cross my fingers and hope once a week, knowing that some of them are parents. But at the same time, it's like even twice a month would be fine, as long as it's scheduled, because I need it to be to fit it into my week. But also I know that people that have kids and other jobs and things like that would also appreciate that. But then I ran into the exact same issue that you're both talking about, which is like, who could I find that I would want to play D&D with that would be open to it? So I've got friends that would want to hang out, but they might not be into D&D. Or reverse, I've got friends that are into D&D, but then they've got 2 kids under 5, and they're just like, that's just not a thing. Both parents need to be on duty, for that kind of stuff. And so or it would be like, yes, they'd be excited, and yes, they'd agree, and they'd show up 1 of 6 sessions, like that kind of a thing. And it became really difficult to try and figure out who I would want to be in the D&D party. And I can understand why people get into it a little bit younger, because they have more time. Like, you don't have the rat race, to contend with, and families and schedules and things like that. But so with the initial campaign, Jonny, like, did you start with a campaign, or did you start, how did you kind of ease everybody in?
I decided I wanted to write basically a tutorial mission of my own, because I was pretty certain there were some things about the world of the kind of pre-written stuff that wasn't necessarily going to appeal to everybody right away. And I had an idea in mind that I figured, this will make a good one-shot, which ended up being a 2-session thing, because they got a little bit more into the role-play side of things and talking between the characters than I was expecting them to. So the first session went on for like nearly 4 hours, and then we were about halfway through the stuff I had planned. So it took a little longer than I expected. But a lot of people say that for your first time, you should probably go with something pre-written. But I felt confident enough in how much I knew about D&D already, having listened to a bunch of podcasts, and I looked around at a few other series and how they started some stuff as well, what I liked, what I didn't. And I felt fairly confident that I could write something that was going to be a good introduction to this stuff. I literally had the characters fighting a practice dummy to get used to combat. Like, they had a kind of leather mannequin style thing out in the backyard of a tavern, because of course it had to start in a tavern. It's D&D. These are the rules. I think I decided that I wanted to have them fight something that couldn't fight back, and then see, how they handled it when they were immediately thrown into their first combat situation right after that. So you get used to combat, and then you get used to combat where there are stakes and things are attacking you back. So I kind of structured it a little bit like you would imagine a tutorial for a video game, having more experience with video games, where I'm literally telling them, press A to attack kind of thing. I'm telling it, roll 20, add this to attack, or roll 20, add this to make a perception check, and that kind of thing. Just getting them used to the mechanics, easing them in, and then encouraging them to use those to explore the world.
I will say, as a player, that is brilliant. That is brilliant. That's actually a really, really great idea.
And I can't even claim it as an original idea, because I've played so many games now which are like that. Even like playing through the Final Fantasy series and the kind of JRPG conventions that I've been introduced to through those, is like the first thing the game does is put either a very powerful character in a situation where you can't lose, or it puts your early character against a few lower powered things, just so you can get used to the rhythm of attacking them and the mechanics of everything. And that made perfect sense to me. And I thought, why not do something like that in a kind of campaign setting? I started them off. First of all, even before all of this, though, the thing that really got them hooked in the first place was character creation. And I've got a link that I put in the show notes to an article on the Alexandrian, which is a guy's personal blog, but it's a lot of stuff over the years that has been written about role-playing games. And the quote in particular being, nothing hooks them like character creation, and just saying how the character creation process really gets you invested in thinking about, instead of like going with one of the pre-rolled characters that you can get with the starter set, if you roll your character's stats, you immediately have an idea of how intelligent they are, how strong they are, you know, what their whole deal is. Are they like really light-fingered and dexterous, or are they not? And then all of the traits and stuff we picked out of the rule books, where it gives you a bunch of tables and says you can roll a d8 to randomly choose one of these, or you can pick the one that feels like most appropriate for a character if you have one in mind. And I went through that with each of them, first with my wife and then with our two friends via Discord or Skype, and we ended up really getting into the characters quite early. And my wife and Michael went away and wrote their own backstories. I think Ella didn't quite have time because she was teaching still, but then everyone really got into the characters. And so I wanted to do those characters justice in a way. I wanted to make sure that there was enough put into the story that was going to reflect those characters instead of throwing them into a generic adventure, which is why I thought writing something from scratch felt like a better idea.
I love this because I'm all about character creation. Like, if there's one thing that I try and focus on, like more so in terms of like a writing perspective, is like how characters are. So one of the things that we really focused on in our first D&D campaign was like focusing on who are these people. We started with the Lost Mines of Fendelver, which is like the entry level starter pack. So the same one that the McElroy brothers did. And
Goblin ambush, go into a cave, exactly. Rescue somebody, that kind of
You have like all the basis of it, which is great. And it was a good way to introduce us to like, you know, the hardcover books. But then similarly to the McElroy brothers, once we finished that, we went off on our own journey. Like, we kind of did like an entry level and then just went wild with it. And character development is one of my favorite things, which is another reason why I kind of fell out of the Adventures League, because you can't spend that time focusing on your character. You can't. It's not a storytelling thing. It's just a way to play combative D&D, essentially.
When you're in Adventurers League, you're not asking the DM, what's my motivation for the scene?
Exactly.
They're like, what do you roll? Tell me your strength modifier. Like,
exactly. So having that that growth of character, and I love that you're like trying to make their backstories significant, because that's, you know, we had a really, really great DM who really focused on writing good backstory. We never got a chance to finish that campaign because she got sick and just wasn't, you know, up to it. And we just it's been years and we just haven't managed to get back to it. But I would love to get back to that one because it was so rich with you know, information, and there was a lot of storylines and threads that, you know, were started and then stopped short because we had to run away or leave. And I'm just like, but what could have happened? Like, what, like, there's still some information about that we want to know that is coming back at a later time that, you know, we wanted to approach. Lately, now we've been doing a lot of like, my roommate is really big on the hardcover. So have you played Curse of Strahd, Johnny?
No, I know of it because it's a vampire story, right? And I think there's a castle in it that Joe Hills on the Hermitcraft server was building in Minecraft a couple of seasons ago.
Ravenloft?
Yeah. So he built basically like a scale model of that using the maps from the campaign as his template, because obviously Minecraft is on a grid, so it's really easy to build stuff that's placed in squares.
Yeah. It's so, and also my roommate is like, she's not good at coming up with stories on her own, but she's good at taking a story that exists and expanding it by like a crazy amount. And she busted out so many things. She got props. Anytime we got a letter, she handed us an actual letter that had like a wax seal on it, and it was all handwritten and like tea stained paper. It was amazing. And then she's done that as well with one called Dragon Heist. And now we finished Dragon Heist already. We've moved into Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which is the second, like the sequel to it, I guess. So we're using the same characters for that, and it's incredible, like the detail that she's put into adding little extra bits of like tactile things just make it really wonderful. We typically play as a group together, but I keep my character sheet on my computer and I use a website called Roll20, which is a free website. Do you use Roll20, Johnny? Are you familiar with that one?
No, we kept everything on paper character sheets for now because I didn't want to create a ton of accounts and then have this be something we did once and never did again.
Right, so, which makes sense.
Yeah, after everybody got pretty into it from these sessions, I'm fairly certain we're going to start looking into digital tabletop stuff. And I actually dropped a link to the D&D website in the show notes as well that has a bunch of resources. Now people are staying indoors more frequently with recommended steps for playing remotely. Roll20 is mentioned there, as is D&D Beyond, and there's a bunch of other virtual tabletop stuff there as well.
We love Roll20, and part of the reason why we like it so much is that we don't have the space for a map. So being able to use, like, we play in our living room and we just put the map on our TV. So everyone can see it. Everyone can see it very easily. And then I like to keep my character sheet in Roll20 specifically because it does all the calculations for you, for stats and everything like that. And if you want to roll something, you can roll directly in that. If you are playing remotely, you can also get mic and camera access, like through the website, so that you can all just see like the people, but you're all still sharing the same map. You have little tokens that you can move around if you do want to adhere to the grid system, which we typically do. But it's wonderful. And then if there's any important information that the DM wants to show you, like oh, you can see this area, or here's what this monster looks like, they can just throw up a picture, instead of having to pass a book around and everyone taking the time to look at it and see what they can deduce from it. But Roll20 is wonderful, and it's been, we haven't used it yet. We're probably going to use it for our next campaign the next session this Friday probably, but it's great. But I love that you're writing your own thing. My friend Becca, who also DMs for us occasionally, will do that, and she is really good at coming up with stuff off the cuff, which is awesome. I personally find DMing really stressful, so I tried it once, and I helped out my roommate with a thing for Curse of Strahd, just like one little section. I was like, nah, I can't. There's too many things to focus on, and again, ADD brain, I jump around so often that I just forget what I'm doing, and I'm like, did I move this person already? I can't remember. So focusing on one character is good for me. But I love that you're writing your own stuff. I'd love to hear about the story that you're telling sometime, if off a podcast, if you're interested.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And I think I'm now working on what is probably going to be a larger campaign, because this sort of little session felt like something that was an adventure that occurred to them maybe early when the characters had just met, and it kind of, it's like a bottle episode kind of thing. It all happens in one area, and then when we start something a little bit more recurring, if we can figure out we're going to be playing every other weekend or something like that, then I'll be writing a campaign that's like a longer thing that takes place in a city over a number of sessions, instead of aiming for it to just be a short story set in one town and a nearby forest. But yeah, it's fun. It's really interesting. The amount of preparation I have to do is stretching a lot of those writing muscles that I miss using for like writing backstory for a bunch of this stuff, and making sure that I have enough details that I can ad lib around whatever the characters want to do and still throw in a bit of written description. It's like a combination of reacting to stuff that they say and some stuff I have pre-written, like a bit of scene setting for wherever they end up. There are this amount of chairs around the room that you could potentially smash over something's head. There was the coolest moment really for me was I had set up that there was a giant two-handed claymore sword over the bar, mounted as though it was like a kind of prize catch in a fishing pub, and this was supposed to be like the tavern master's old sword, and she had been a paladin in a war that had been fought a long time ago and had now kind of retired and was the tavern master. And the sword is just kind of hung ominously over the bar, a bit Chekhov's gun style. And I didn't know if it was actually going to come into use or not. And when the characters came back to the tavern and some stuff had gone south for them, they realized that something was very wrong and the tavern master was probably in on it. They were like, the first thing they did was check whether that sword was still above the bar. And I was like, okay, it is. The sword is still mounted there, still covered in dust, like it's not been used for ages. Then later, they fight the tavern master and a bunch of goblins that she has been brewing in barrels under the cellar. The idea was like, through some sort of weird magic that I just made up on the spot when I was writing this, she has basically been converting wine into goblins and other monsters and unleashing them on the town. And her plans get foiled. The heroes beat her up. They tie her up in the cellar. She gets loose, comes out to the bar, prepares to attack them again. And then I had everybody roll to determine like what their reflexes were. And she rolled a 1. And so what happen was that as she's like leaping towards them to attack them, she like hits her hip on the bar and it rattles all of the furniture and the fixings and stuff, the sword drops from where it is mounted above the bar and goes straight through her. And so it's like, you don't have to fight her again. She just got killed by her own hubris. And I liked that, the kind of almost literally falling on her own sword, but in reverse kind of thing. And it felt like karma, and it was very, very fun to role play that whole situation.
Oh man, that sounds so good. Sorry, Joel, I feel like we've left you out of the conversation.
No, this is specifically why I wanted both of you on the show at the same time, is because I don't know necessarily all the right questions to ask. Although I do have one with regards to the falling on your sword. So when you say that the Tavern Master rolled a 1, do they get to see that, or is that something that you roll kind of like behind the scenes and you just make your decision based on what you've rolled, not reveal that it was the roll that did that? Therefore, they don't know what the other outcomes would be.
Yeah, I've kind of adopted the practice of rolling behind a screen. I've seen a lot of arguments for and against it. Obviously you don't want to kind of conceal rolls from people if they are unsure if you're being honest about it, but it also gives the option to fudge rolls if you want to. If you feel like, say a random encounter is happening, but the party is not rolling particularly well, and it looks like they might be beaten by whatever, bear is attacking them. You kind of don't want to. It's bad form generally to kind of kill the party with a random encounter. So I think, it was a good idea to set up a kind of loose, it's literally like a cardboard box folded in half kind of thing,
right?
That I had set up as a screen. But I was rolling behind that, and I was sometimes telling the party what the die roll was, but more often than not, I would just say, he slashes at you and misses if they hadn't rolled high enough to hit their armor class. Or sometimes you have to check the numbers with the players to make sure that it doesn't, so they can make a saving throw and that kind of stuff. Or if you're doing a contest, then the numbers are sometimes helpful information to the players. But for most of it, I kind of wanted to, keep that stuff secret, conceal the actual numbers so they could stay more immersed in the action at the time.
And I think too that with, everybody having their first, play session, knowing that you're rolling and knowing what some of those rolls might be would be educational and just help them kind of like sort out how combat works and all that kind of stuff. And then later on they can say like, oh, well, the Tavern Master obviously didn't roll very well. They don't have to know exactly, but they can know, oh yeah, that was bad. That didn't go the way that it was supposed to go. But yes. I can imagine it would be frustrating too the other way around if you've got a challenging fight that you've taken a long time to prepare and write some lore for, and just by pure rolls, your party is owning face, and you're like, I kind of don't want this like two-headed troll to die in the first 30 seconds of this fight. I'd like there to be at least a little bit of drama. And so he's like, he rolled a 1. I'm going to call that something else.
Yeah. No, I've seen that happen the opposite way around, where like there's times I've been loosely watching bits of Critical Role. I haven't watched any of their stuff like from start to finish yet.
I watch it loosely too, but my roommate watches it religiously every single week.
Yeah. There is so much of it, but there is definitely there's one campaign that's sort of a little bit later on in their second season. One of the characters who's got like a really high intelligence score tries to decode a cipher in this book, rolls a natural 20 and has a high enough intelligence modifier that it can actually be done. Like the DM sets like a stupidly high target for it and he meets the target. And I think, from what I understand, that skipped like a good portion of all of the other stuff they would have to do because they instantly understood what the villain's plot was going to be. So, like, I didn't really give that much opportunity for players to bypass stuff that I had. And if anything, they had a couple of options that they could have taken that they didn't, but I had still prepared bits and pieces for. Like, when they come back to ambush, or they get ambushed by the Tavern Master, there was a way that if they had decided to kind of go in the back entrance, they could have found a way down into the cellar that wouldn't have had them be detected immediately. And then they would have overheard a conversation that would probably have led to the same encounter. But I like to build stuff in where there are multiple branching paths that converge on ultimately the same thing. And that just seems like the logical way for an adventure to proceed if you want it to have a beginning and an end, but you don't want the whole thing to be on rails.
Yeah, no, that sounds like more fun. It gives the players more control, at least a better sense of control and decision making and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I had some random encounters. I had them go out into the sort of nearby woods to search for an ingredient that turned out to be the kind of catalyst ingredient that the Tavern Master was using to make all of these magical goblins. And I had them roll dice to determine which of 8 paths they would take, and that led to a bunch of encounters that I'd written out. And half of them we just end up not using. But one of them in particular was one that I was like, this has to come up, which was they encounter a bunch of statues, and there are effectively puzzles to solve. Because one of the things I decided early on was I didn't want the party to gain experience just from combat, because to me that's like, if they don't enjoy combat, then that's the only way their characters can progress. That feels kind of unfortunate to me. I wanted there to be other methods of them gaining XP, because we were still leveling the characters up based on XP rather than sort of milestones in the story. And each of the statues in this clearing that they find in the forest corresponded to one of the characters, and as they sort of figured out which one was which, then they each had like a small puzzle to solve kind of thing. But yeah, that was the one thing that I was like, regardless of whether or not anybody rolls this, I want this to happen as part of the character's progression, because it gives them some items that they can use and that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm enjoying building stuff like that in, and allowing it to be a game that is more about exploring the world than it is just about fighting stuff constantly. Because if anything, one of the things I learned about this group is that even though they did enjoy the fighting, especially when it was going well for them, they found combat to be quite a slow process. And for some of them, especially when you're lower level and you only have like a couple of attacks you can choose, it kind of got a little bit dull.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that in future we can either get them to a level where they have more variety and give them more kind of like puzzle fights in a way, something that's where the solution is not necessarily just hack at this thing until dead, and maybe it can be a bit more like, well, we have to figure out what this thing's weaknesses are, or use some elements of the environment to help. But I think I also have to do a better job of cluing them into that stuff being there in the first place. And yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to, really, is finding ways to make essential elements like that important, but also prioritize what I think the players want to do, which is solve mysteries and go on quests and stuff for people without necessarily having to get into a bar fight every 5 minutes.
It's a really fine line too. Like right now, the campaign that we're doing is awesome, but there's not a lot of walking. We're in a dungeon essentially, just kind of walking around and just like on edge, waiting for something to attack us. But there's just a long stretch of hallway. So for the last 2 campaigns, we haven't really fought anything because we're just trying to like navigate stuff. But it's I find that it's really hard to strike a balance between world building, mystery solving, and fighting, because I like both of them, but too much fighting can get really dry again, which is why I left AL. But too much just not combat is I find I get really bored with that too. So it's really hard to strike an even mix with it. But it sounds like you guys have a really good routine happening with your like. Is it just the one session you've done so far, Jonny?
We've done 2 so far.
Okay.
So it was basically one story told over 2 separate sessions.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, so I think they're hooked, and we have we have a Discord chat and we have a WhatsApp group that people can throw stuff in as they want to, and the Discord is what we ended up using to do the voice call, because the first session Michael was actually here because the coronavirus situation hadn't developed to the point where nobody was able to go outside. The second session we did remotely, just me and my wife here, and the 2 of them at their respective locations, which thankfully went really well. Discord provided a lot of a decent quality video call, despite the fact that, yeah, we were all arranged in different places. Michael lives close by to us. Ella is in California. So, yeah, there was a little bit of the call dropped sort of here and there, but it was mostly fine. And yeah, I think that with the balance between combat and puzzle solving, I like the idea of introducing one to the other. It's kind of like how horror films will introduce a moment of comedy just to kind of break the tension sometimes. And like, I kind of want to throw in some stuff like that. I think the highlights from our first session were really moments where those things combined, or somebody finally got to score a hit on something if they'd been rolling badly for a while. And especially if they were role playing it like, oh, she's getting really frustrated and really wants to like take out one of these goblins, so she fires a spell and then rolls really high, and then the damage roll is really high as well. And it started with my my wife's gnome warlock character basically blasting her first goblin, basically the first thing she managed to score a decent hit on, splattering it across the opposite wall. And because these goblins were made out of wine in the first place, they kind of dissolved into this sort of goopy wine stuff anyway. And so we basically painted the room with a bunch of goblins. Ella's paladin dragonborn baseball batted another one with her axe. And that was super cool. And apparently afterwards, she told me this was completely separate from any conversations I had with her about the character. She told my wife that was the one thing I wanted to do, was like really hit something with my axe, like baseball style. And so I was like, I just, we role played that in the moment, and it seemed to work super well. And then later on in the confrontation with the tavern master, when they were all kind of tied up at first and had to figure out a way of breaking their bonds, Michael's half-elf druid character became a horse, which is a thing druids can do.
That.
Druids have this ability called Wild Shape, which allows them to transform into any creature they have seen before. And in the previous session, we'd established that there was a horse out in the practice yard where they were doing their kind of mannequin thing, and so he literally became the cart horse that worked at the pub, which is kind of great, because then he ends up breaking his bonds. He got a surprise round on the two characters who are kind of the villains, and the one attack that was listed for horse in the monster manual was just hooves, and so it became that John Mulaney bit where he's going, "I'm going to trample you with my hooves. I'm a horse loose in a cellar," and it was great, and they are still talking about that. There are still jokes in the group about and gifs being passed around of the people with those horse head masks on and stuff.
Oh man, we're still talking about jokes and things that happened in our first campaign. So we call anyone who's a rogue a dumb bitch. Like, every rogue is just, they're infected with dumb bitch disease. It doesn't matter who you are as an actual person. As soon as you're a rogue, you just get really reckless about everything. And I've seen it across multiple groups. One guy in our group who is usually pretty level-headed and really he's really strategic with everything. He's playing a rogue and he has dumb bitch disease. Like, he's actually just going off and doing his own thing. We're like, no, stick to the plan. What are you doing? In our first session, one of our friends who is a little bit more chaotic as a human in real life is playing a rogue, and we actually it had been a consistent thing with his character that he would just go off and do things on his own, and we had to sit him down and be like, okay, no, listen, you have to stay with the group, this is really serious, we have a plan in order. He's like, got it, don't worry about it. The next thing he does is proceed to go off and do his own thing. And it was just what are you doing? But we're still bringing up those jokes, and those kind of things stay with you for a long time. And I love that. It's some of my favorite stuff. It's I don't know, it's developing camaraderie, and it's especially with these characters where I don't know if those characters have kind of come together and just sort of let's just hang out together, or if they all had tied in backstories or what have you. But everyone in our group had just, kind of in real life too, we only knew a couple of people in the group, and then now we're all really close friends because it's just someone new brought this person into a game, and now we all hang out all the time. But is having our characters develop relationships with each other, which is some of the most interesting parts, I think, of the storytelling. I don't know, it's, as a player, that's my favorite. And learning about the characters, I like it when people don't divulge too much about their character, because finding it out along the way during the game is fascinating, and I love that part.
Yeah. I think while I know what the characters' backstories are, the Ella is still developing a backstory for her Dragonborn character, and I didn't want to weave that stuff into the tutorial mission, because then they basically have nothing left after that. And so a lot of that stuff didn't come up, and there are a couple of things where they haven't told each other what the deal is with certain aspects of their character, and some of it is more mysterious and is going to come in later. What we have established so far is that they all want to be on a boat at some point, and that's as much as that's as much as I've been able to get out of them, because one of them is the druid is a farm boy who's basically never seen the ocean. The warlock is a shipwright who worked on a ship as her masterpiece, but for some reason wasn't able to give it to her kind of patron, in this case for the masterpiece to be complete, and decided this person wasn't worthy, and so hid it away. And that's how she kind of gets her warlock powers, is she enlists the help of a fae in order to hide it. And the Dragonborn we don't know yet, and her name even changed from one session to another, because she picked a name that was just in the player's handbook at first, just to not hold up the process so that we could start playing. But then later on, she and my wife worked together and came up with another name that fit the character a little better. And once we'd started using that, by the end of the session, she was like, yeah, no, I'm really into this name now. So yeah, we still don't know too much about her character, but Ella is apparently now writing stuff because she's on spring break and schools being shut down for the most part, is, looking at a lot more free time. So here's hoping that we get to explore some of those backstory details in future. But yeah, I'm pretty sure some of it is going to have to be set, if not at sea, then definitely on the coast a little bit later. And we'll have to see how that works out.
Amazing. Nice. I love it.
I hope that some of the people listening that have been at least curious about Dungeons and Dragons, or at least maybe even hardened vets, are interested in some of the things that we've been able to kind of surface here. I know that I definitely want to try to check out more D&D online, in terms of do I want to start a campaign? Do I want to be a DM? What's it like to DM? I think I need more than just a couple of weeks experience to just make that decision. And having resources and stuff like that available to us all online is essential. Jonny, I know that you mentioned Adventure Zone and Critical Role, I think.
Yes.
Are there any other things that you'd like to share with folks at home that they can check out?
Yeah, I've got a few more links here in the show notes for you. So yeah, aside from Adventure Zone and Critical Role, I will note beforehand, before I make any more recommendations, these are all by adults for adults. They contain bad language, adult humor, and in the case of this next one, absolute rampant absurdity. Rude Tales of Magic is a relatively new D&D show that's produced at the same studio that does the Cyberpunk RPG podcast I listen to, Fun City. But Rude Tales of Magic is... I think a lot of the time in D&D, players bring a lot of distractions to the table that the DM is always trying to bring back in line. Players are usually diverting the adventure, and the DM is having to wrangle everything. Rude Tales is kind of the inverse of that, where the DM is bringing so much abstract bullshit to the campaign at every turn that people, the players are struggling to keep up half the time, and it's the funniest, most bizarre. I will give you a quote from the opening, which is there is a sort of establishing thing about the world, but then he says the university that you guys all start in is established and is named after the god Polaris, the god of going to the bathroom. Polaris is locked in an eternal struggle with his twin sister Natura, who is the god of just letting the piss and shit fall out wherever. And that sets the tone for the rest of the show. Basically, it is just not so crazy stuff happening, and lots of gory stuff and cosmic horror and just rude, lewd humor. There's a great slow burn, will they, won't they kind of relationship developing between two of the player characters, which is a delight and is a moment of tranquility in this otherwise just madcap adventure. Outside of that, I will recommend two other things, one of which is behind a paywall. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but Dimension 20, which I think is College Humor's D&D show, did a show called Tiny Heist. And the first episode of it is available for free on YouTube. The rest of it, I think, is behind a paywall. But that was a homebrew D&D setting, which takes place in a kind of combination of Trolls and Toy Story kind of worlds, where there's a bunch of talking animated toys and bug people and little kind of almost troll figurine sized gnome kind of characters, all living in this house. And there's a heist that goes down where they have to steal a roll of quarters from the house, which is a lifetime's worth of fortune. And that's the McElroys from the Adventure Zone, plus a bunch of other people, all being DM'd by a guy called Brennan Lee Mulligan, who is a very good DM. And yeah, the setup for that all takes place in episode 1 is very, very good, very funny, and a really interesting look at how D&D can branch out from the kind of fantasy setting that it is used to being played in. So it doesn't have to take place in Forgotten Realms and kind of elves and dwarves and everything. There can be different races with the same classes, and they've kind of homebrewed a lot of the differences in how the characters work. And last of all, my friend AJ actually runs a D&D podcast called Pretending with Dice. There's on Podbean and probably available wherever you get podcasts. But they are just starting a new campaign. I think they're wrapping up the one they've been playing previously, and they don't always play D&D. But Pretending with Dice is the name, and I think they're starting a new D&D thing with some pretty diverse and off-the-map kind of characters. They've got races that I've never even heard of yet, and I've done extensive research at this stage. So yeah, there's some really interesting stuff going on with them, and I recommend giving that a listen.
Nice. I have one D&D, I will say general tabletop, but obviously Dungeons and Dragons comes up quite a lot. One reference. I've mentioned this on the show before, and this is from Wouter, a community member here of the Citadel Cafe, the voyagersworkshop.com. Check it out. He's on Instagram as well. He is an artist and a writer and a creator, and he does like art and items, like peripheral stuff related to tabletop gaming. But he also has a newsletter that presents a lot of resources for tabletop gaming. Like, you know, hey, if you're new to this, what would you like to try? Do you want to do Star Wars? Do you want to do D&D? Like, what's your flavor? And kind of walks people through kind of like the early days of like, so you might be interested in tabletop gaming sort of idea. He also tabletop games with his kids, both of whom I believe are under 10. If not, they're very close to that. And then we'll kind of give you an update about how the sessions are going. You know, are they liking it? Are they not liking it? Like, what's their favorite parts? All that kind of stuff. So it's a great resource. It's at thevoyagersworkshop.com. Megan, do you have any online stuff for people to check out?
I do, yeah. Mostly YouTube related stuff, but a Canadian group called the Dungeon Dudes, they have a combination of a campaign that they do, and they also provide a lot of really great information about character building and the differences between characters, multi-classing, like any just, character building stuff. And then Z Bashu does a series called the Animated Spellbook, where he just animates little 5-minute clips and will talk about funny D&D stories that happened, like in his campaign, or explaining spells, and he kind of breaks them down in an animated way so you can visualize them a little bit better. So you can, he'll talk about underrated spells that are not used often, creative ways to use said spells. So it kind of helps you if you're a person who's playing a magical based character, and you have all these spells to pick from. You're like, what do I choose? He's really great at breaking them down and making them easier. And I couldn't find the link for it, but there's another series called The Crap Guide to D&D, which is similar to Z Bashu's animated spellbook, but a little bit more off the cuff and silly. Whereas Z is a bit more informative, but still tries to keep it lighthearted and fun.
Nice. Hopefully we can find that, or if you know of it, dear listener,
I'm hunting.
please write in and let us know if you've heard of that before. In the meantime, I can move on to the Internet Minute, which is of course brought to you by you, dear listener. If you enjoy the Citadel Cafe, we are 100% listener supported. If you're getting value out of the show, please consider putting a little bit of value back in. You can become a member at patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. Joining at any level will get you an invite to the member-only Discord server. There's also multiple levels to choose from, with things like Discord roles and bonus episodes like our barista cuts that are accessible only to people that are a member of the Patreon. Patreon count currently at 19. Our goal each month is to have at least one more patron than the month before. I think we're actually down one this month. But if you are so inclined and you'd like to help support the show, keep us going, then check it out at patreon.com/The Citadel Cafe. I would very much appreciate it. And my pick this week is yet more distraction for you. I have been sleeping, and breathing Minecraft for quite some time. And I picked up a couple of other games over the last few months, and recently got back into Satisfactory, which is a factory building and management efficiency game. Not for everybody, but if you're into games like Minecraft, it's fun. It lets you to build stuff. It gets very cool looking very quickly because you're placing down very complex machines, and usually a number of them. But in the process of doing that, I was reminded that one of the YouTubers I follow also plays Satisfactory and has been playing a lot since the Update 3, which just happened last week. And that is Z1 Gaming. He's a pretty positive guy. I believe his first name is Caesar. The Let's Play videos that he does, I haven't actually seen any Minecraft on his channel, but he does things like Satisfactory, Astroneer, Journey to the Savage Planet, Subnautica. They're all very similar, kind of like you're stranded in the middle of nowhere. You've got minimal resources. You have to collect things, to build things, to progress through the game, check the boxes, do all the stuff, while exploring some beautiful landscapes. I've not seen a lot of the Savage Planet. The screenshots I've seen look very unique. Subnautica, I've seen more of, and it looks cool. I've never played it. Astroneer, though, I have watched a tutorial video on the Z1 Gaming channel about Astroneer, and that seemed really interesting as well. Very cartoony, very chill. A lot of these games don't tend to put you in peril very often, and it's only at your own decision. For example, in Satisfactory, there are like weird lizard dog things that will come and chase you, but only when you're venturing out to explore. They don't come into your factory and constantly cause a nuisance. And any animal that does is like a passive herbivore kind of grazer that just kind of walks by for environmental, just a hint of ambiance, right? But if you're out in the world and you don't feel like, dealing with anything stressful, you can check out Z1 Gaming on YouTube. We'll have the link in the show notes. And I'll also link to his clean start on Satisfactory Update 3. And he goes through quite a lot of stuff. And he does a good job of explaining kind of like what he's doing and why he's doing it. So even if you're new to the game, it's still a pretty entertaining 20 minutes where he is doing a lot of fun things. He genuinely enjoys what he does. Very often is just giggling to himself over something silly. And I found it a really fun watch. So check that out at Z1 Gaming. We'll have the link again in the show notes. That wraps up this episode of the Citadel Cafe. You can find more about the show and some of the things that we talked about, or all of the things that we talked about, on the citadelcafe.com. Music for the show was, of course, composed by Kevin MacLeod. You can email the show at thecitadelcafe@gmail.com or find us by name on Twitter and Facebook. Subscribe on iTunes, Android, Stitcher, and Spotify. Still, word of mouth is the easiest way to support the show. Normally I say poke a friend in the arm, but hey, I'm going to say shout this from across the street, maybe from a safe distance. Just let friends know about the show. Usually social media, the din of everybody posting all the time can kind of get lost, but personal recommendations, whether it's, emailing a friend or next time you're FaceTiming a relative, if you think they might enjoy this, then let them know about it, because that's one of the best ways that the show can actually gain some new listeners. My name is Joel Duggan. You can find everything I am doing online, including my illustration and design portfolio, at joelduggan.com. You can also listen to me and Johnny at the Minecraft podcast, The Spawn Chunks, and you can find that at thespawnchunks.com. Johnny and I record every Monday. And of course, my name on social media is the best way to find me. I'm going to direct you towards Twitch, where I'm playing both Minecraft and Satisfactory at the moment. And that's twitch.tv/Joel Duggan. Johnny, I'm going to start with you. Where can people find you and the fun stuff you're doing online?
You can find me by searching for Pixlriffs, Pixlriffs. I'm on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and a couple of other places I expect people can also find me. Lately, I've been building mountains on my Twitch stream, so if you want to come by and watch somebody place 10,000 blocks of stone in Minecraft, that is not a joke. I'm at 160,000 total right now, and it is only increasing. And then, over on YouTube, I'm running a Skyblock series and a Survival Guide Minecraft series side by side, having a lot of fun with both. And I just generated a bunch more ideas this morning. I sat down with a notepad and basically sketched out the next maybe 10 or so episodes of Survival Guide, just so I don't forget my new ideas in the meantime. And that is going to continue apace. But like I said earlier in the show, I'm going to be taking it on a bit more of a relaxed schedule. So don't expect a video every day, but they will come along every so often. And in the meantime, I'm available on Twitter if anybody just wants to give me a wave, say hi.
Dude, thanks so much for coming on the show. This was a lot of fun.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
Megan, where can people find you online?
People can find me online at Megan Townsend on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitch. And now that I have a lot of free time, there'll be more content coming out, hopefully really soon.
You've been listening to the Citadel Cafe, where we are fast, easy, and cheap. Let's hope you don't roll a 2.